elderly male with a possible high fever. We didn't have much more information because of the caller. His elderly wife was, according to dispatcher, hard to understand. Anyway, we head out to get there 7 minutes or so later. As we go in, the wife is sitting at the kitchen table just inside the door. So we ask her what's going on. She answers that he has been complaining he is all too hot all morning. We go to the next room, which is dark due to curtains covering the windows, but there is enough light to see a dead man sitting in a chair. Now mind you, he was not recently dead. I'm talking blackened face, rot/rat bites around his mouth. Wasn't complaining this morning type of dead. I set down my equipment and my partner goes to turn the light on next to his chair so we can verify the obvious. As she goes to reach for the light, the dead man groans and reaches for her hand. After collectively shitting our pants, we jump into action. Come to find out, he was on oxygen and a smoker. He was complaining about being hot because he was literally burning up. What looked like signs of death on his face were scorch marks and melted plastic. To answer the obvious question, I don't know. He was still alive when we got him to the hospital. I never asked what happened to him after that.
This woman was clearly struggling mentally. She went into her basement and started sawing at her wrists horizontally with a rusty hacksaw, bleeds a good amount, and then starts walking around the house. She wasn't dying quick enough, so she sat down in a chair in the middle of the living room and started going at her wrists again, this time with a pair of scissors. I was the second person inside the house. It looked like a massacre. We searched the house top to bottom, fully expecting to find multiple dead bodies in there. I've never seen so much blood in my life. Every single room had a trail of blood in it. The woman was found on a chair in the living room. Rigor mortis had contorted her body into a really strange, unnatural pose, and her face was haunting, literally the stuff of nightmares. Her wrists had huge chunks of skin, vein, muscle missing from them. Saying she slit her wrists is inaccurate. She ripped them to pieces.
We responded to an apartment building when the caretaker had called us. His initial report was that he went to check on a suite because water had been reported flooding into the hallway. He informed us there was a deceased lady in the tub. He said he saw her and immediately backed out without touching anything. We entered the suite. It was filled with steam. The humidity had started peeling the paint off the walls and sheets. There was also the smell of cooked meat. Upon entering the bathroom, we found the supposed deceased sitting in the tub with the hot water running. From the looks of it, she had been there a while. The skin on her body, all the way from her toes to her sternum, had started separating. Much like the paint on the walls, it was bubbled and coming up in sheets. I checked for vitals while someone turned off the water and others went to get a bag and radio. For a can, when a body is badly decomposed, we put them in a sheet metal box. I almost shit my pants when I found signs of life. The lady had a pulse. She wasn't really responsive, but she was breathing shallow and had a heartbeat, and she was looking at us. We had to get her out. We radioed for EMS and informed them we had a live patient with at least 80% burns. They were a few minutes out, so we started to get the patient ready for transport. I don't remember what we were doing when we noticed the water draining from the tub, but what we saw was her torso essentially degloving itself as the water receded. We immediately plugged the bathtub and continued working her. When EMS arrived, we had to transfer her to a stretcher.
That's where things got ugly.
We planned to gently lift her out of the tub and place her on the stretcher. However, as soon as we touched her, her skin was coming off in sheets. I remember saying, "Sorry ma'am, but we have to do this." As I picked up my section and came away with almost all the skin I contacted stuck to my arms, that was the only time she made a sound. She probably couldn't feel it due to the nerve damage, but I'm pretty sure she knew she had lost almost all of her skin from the chest down. The water was extremely hot, so we were also getting burned while doing this. We managed to get her into the stretcher and the EMS took her away. When the bathtub was drained, there was a sheet of skin stuck on the bottom. We had to scrape it off and bag it. I still can't eat certain chicken dishes because of this. We figured she was in the tub and the water got cool, so she turned it on with her toe. She must have had a stroke and could not turn it off again. Being an apartment, it had pretty much unlimited hot water, so that poor lady sat there for approximately 3 days cooking. She did not survive. We don't get a lot of follow-up on calls, but I heard she passed away. Between a stroke and severe burns, it wasn't likely she'd make it. But we treat every patient like they have a chance. The human body is a weird and wonderful thing. Sometimes people make it through some pretty terrible things.
We responded to one middle-aged female who called 911 for an unknown problem. We knocked on her door to only see her open it a crack, peer out, and ask in a suspicious tone, "Are you the good guys, or are you with those bad guys in those trees?" Since we were the only two people there, we were pretty confident in our good guy status and were granted entry. She was hallucinating terribly. She literally thought that there were a bunch of bad guys out to get her in her front yard, and she refused to leave her house. She would not get in our ambulance. She kept peering out the window and telling us about the guys with guns. At the end of the day, our job is to get her the help she needed at the hospital, and she refused to listen to our pleas that there were no bad guys outside. So, I role-played. I told her she would be safe with us because we were tactically trained in urban assault EMS techniques. Oddly enough, that calmed her down. My partner ran out on the porch, looked left, looked right, and ran as fast as he could to open the back of the ambulance door. I stayed with the patient and told her we would protect her at all costs. My partner yelled from the back of the ambulance, "Sector 5 is clear! Move, move, move!" I told my patient it was now or never. "Let's roll. Go, go, go." We both did a duck and cover as we took a flying leap onto the back of the ambulance. I barked orders at my partner. "Get up front. Let's roll. Make sure we're not followed." He promptly complied and took the safe route to the emergency room. I kept looking out the back windows and reassured my patient that we were not being followed. Our roleplay seems silly, but guess what? My patient felt 100% safe in the back of the ambulance with me. She trusted me, and we got her the help she needed at the hospital.
This story is quite short, but it still sends shivers up my spine. I don't know what happened that night, but if I was alone, I would definitely never have slept. It was Halloween night. I know that sounds crazy, but that's when the worst and the most weird things happen. Before I say anything, I don't believe in ghosts, but I can't exactly explain this. I was with my friend Amelia and her friends. Carly, who are both older than me by a year, but we get along very well. We were spending the Halloween together with my older brother and Amelia's brother. We all were done getting candy, but I was going to sleep over at their house. We decided to visit a girl up the street from us for fun, and we ate pizza, but it was pitch black outside, and once we left our cozy home, the three of us girls were chilled by the soft glow from the street lamps and the steep, empty road. It was getting later, about 10:30 or so. Fewer people were out getting candy. It was just us. We began strolling down the sidewalk, calmly talking to each other and giggling about whatever, and totally sugar-rushed from the chocolate and Sour Patch Kids. We suddenly heard footsteps behind us. We never thought much of it, but we sped up walking. All of us had turned and checked, but obviously we saw nothing. The footsteps began speeding up, and before we knew it, we were running at full speed. I was so scared at something that seemed to be nothing, but I promised something was there. We were almost home, but my legs ached so bad. I was running for my life, but I didn't even know what was there. Once we reached the safety of the home, and the bright garage decorated with goofy skeletons and spiders, With the adults slouching around in, we felt safe. We headed inside and ate some more candy, like we needed it, and kind of laughed at the situation. It was time to sleep. It was probably around 11:45, and our eyes were getting droopy, so we all huddled in a comfy bed to rest. Around 12:30, we were still awake, but actually, we were on the verge of sleep when we heard 2 knocks. Knock. Knock. We all heard them, because we all sat up in bed. "Did you hear that?" I asked, taking a breath. "Yes," they muttered, hoping it was nothing. Eventually, we all fell asleep, but this morning was the one we would remember forever. We were testing to see what might have been knocked on, and what made me freeze was that it came from the big painting right next to our bed. I still don't know what happened that Halloween, but it wasn't the parents or our brothers because they went to bed hours before us, and we never heard the door open once.
Edward Brian McCleary was just 19 when he and his 4 teenage friends, Warren, Eric, Larry, and Brad, said they were attacked by a prehistoric beast. On March 24th of 1962, the 5 friends decided to check out the USS Massachusetts. The Navy had sunk the decommissioned ship off the east coast to Pensacola, Florida, and the boys thought it would be the perfect place to scuba dive. Adventurous teenagers, creepy location, evil monster. You see where this is going. As the boys sailed towards the battleship in a rubber raft, they hit a fierce storm. After being tossed around by strong winds, they found themselves lost in the fog. While they didn't run across undead pirates, they did find something worse. As the sun sank, the boys heard something splashing nearby. It was when they smelled the stench of rot and heard something hissing. McCleary claims that he saw something like a 3-meter or 10-foot pole or very long neck coming straight at them. Panicking, the teens ditched their craft and swam for the battleship. But as they paddled, McCleary saw the monster pull Eric Rule underwater. Then he heard Warren shout, "It's got Brad." A few moments later, Sally screamed in pain, and Larry Bill vanished into the fog. McCleary swam to shore, where he was discovered by a rescue crew. 3 years later, he sold his story to the magazine and sketched an image of the beast supposedly killing his friends. The illustration bears a striking resemblance to a plesiosaurus.
The Fayetteville River Monster. Over the years, we've heard and read about a variety of cryptid sightings in Fayette County, Pennsylvania, which includes a supposed underwater beast in the Cheat River known as Monster of Seltzer's Hole. The Cheat River is a 78-mile-long tributary of the Monongahela River. The following account appeared in the Philadelphia Times on July 31st, 1893. For months past, farmers living near the Line Ferry have been missing sheep, lambs, pigs, and even young calves, to say nothing of innumerable chickens, turkeys, and geese. And until a few days ago, they all blamed the Italians and other laborers engaged in grading the state line road with stealing the animals. Not a night since early last spring has passed without some farmer waked up in the morning to find that he had been robbed of a fat pig, a young calf, a sheep, 2 or 3 choice lambs, or half a dozen of his finest barnyard fowls. Effort was made to catch the thief, but every attempt proved a failure, and everybody had settled down to the belief that the laborers along the railroad were doing the stealing. But the mystery has at last been cleared up to the minds of at least 3 of the most reputable farmers of the neighborhood. They will not at present allow their names to be made public, and it was only after assuring the correspondent to keep their names out of print that they told him what they knew about this Monster of Seltzer's Hole, as it's called. They each saw the monster on different occasions, but at about the same hour in the morning, and gave about the same description of it. "I first saw the monster," said one of the farmers. Just at daybreak last Tuesday morning, I got up very early to go to Uniontown and started out to the pasture field to get the horses. And just as I opened the barnyard gate, I heard a terrible racket down by the calf pen, which was immediately followed by the stampede of every living object in the barnyard in the direction of the house. The chickens and turkeys flew with loud cries of distress into the trees in the yard and to the roof of the house. And all the cattle and pigs crowded around me, trembling with fright and utter pitiful outcries of terror. Something down at the calf pen had given them a terrible fright, but what it was I could not imagine. But I resolved to find out, and pushing my way through the trembling animals, I started down to the calf pen. When I got within 20 yards of the pen, the most horrible-looking monster the mind could conceive clambered over the strong rail fence that surrounds the calf pen, carrying in its mouth a 3-day-old calf. I tried to turn and fly to the house for protection, but if the monster had been within a foot of me, I could not have moved an inch. I tried to cry out, but not a sound escaped my lips. My tongue seemed to be made out of lead, and my eyes were fixed on the awful-looking creature that was slowly moving off toward the river, still carrying in its mouth the calf it had stolen. It looked to me to be the size of an Alderney cow, although its legs were very much shorter, and its body was somewhat longer. Its back was ridged and humped in the center, and from behind each shoulder protruded something which was neither a wing, fin, arm or claw, though it resembled each of them. Its tail was long and thick, and resembled that of a crocodile, except that the end was forked, resembling that of a monstrous fish. Its feet were webbed and resembled those of a bear in outline, and were as large as a peck measure. The body was covered with big, heavy scales, which moved as the monster walked. But the head of the dragon was the most fearful-looking part of all. It was as large as that of a horse, and covered with large, warty knots. Directly in the forehead, and just below the eyes, was a monstrous, jagged horn-like protuberance. And just back of the ears were 2 similar-looking horns, though somewhat smaller. The eyes were as large as a teacup, and stuck out from their sockets at least 1.5 inches. The mouth of the beast I could not see very well, for the struggling calf was in it. But it must have been exceedingly large, for the monstrous jaws reached almost across the calf's body. The monster had traveled at least 100 yards toward the river before I recovered sufficiently to move. I was not asleep, but as wide awake as I ever was in my life. I resolved to follow the monster at a safe distance and see where it went. Rushing into the house, I seized my double-barreled shotgun, and without waking the rest of the family, I started after the ugly beast, and again caught sight of it just as it reached a clump of bushes on the cliff which overhangs the river near Line Ferry. It was broad daylight by this time, and with both barrels of my gun cocked, I followed in the monster's wake. When I reached the cliff, I looked down over it and saw the monster just crossing the road and making for the big rock in the water's edge alongside Seltzer's hole. It turned around when it reached the river bank and glared back at me. And then, with something between a growl and a bellow, it leaped into the water and disappeared from sight. I went down to the bank and watched for sight of the monster for over an hour. But as it did not show itself again, I went home. I did not tell my folks what I had seen, but simply said that somebody or something had stolen one of the calves during the night. Neither did I say anything about it to any of the neighbors until this morning. I knew they would not believe me and might start a report that I was going crazy. But this morning my neighbor came over to my house, and after fidgeting about for over an hour or two, took me out to the barn and said that he was bound to tell me something. After swearing me to secrecy, he told me that the monster that I had seen on Tuesday morning, for it was evidently the same one, had carried off one of his finest sheep this morning, and that he had followed it to Seltzer's hole, where it disappeared in the river. My neighbor and I then went up to our other neighbor and told him what we had seen, and he told us he had seen it twice last week, but was afraid to tell anyone about it, for the fear they would not believe him. I can't imagine what kind of animal it can be or how it came to be in Seltzer's hole. We are going to keep a lookout for the monster tonight, and if he comes out, we'll try to give him a good dose of buckshot. A number of people of the neighborhood have reported that they have seen a strange-looking beast at night on the hills near Cheat Haven during the past 3 months. But no one paid any attention to the stories, thinking them to be the creature of an imaginative brain. But if the word of the 3 farmers referred to can be believed, the reports are true. Seth's sea monster story. Back in the summer of 2014, I used to live in Oregon. Nina, my wife's friend husband John, owned a nice-sized boat that he had docked in one of the coastal towns. Having lived there a couple of years, while only going to the coast twice the entire time, when we were offered a ride on it one summer day, we agreed. I had never been on a boat, and I have always wanted to know what it was like to sail on the sea. I used to live in the deserts of Arizona, so living close to the sea was a real treat for me. Add to that the lush green of the state and the many forests it has, and I was awestruck. I never used to see that much green in Arizona. Granted, it rained all the damn time, it seemed. And it did get pretty cold. After all, where I lived was only a few miles from the halfway point between the Arctic and the equator. But it was a small price to me to live in such beauty. Plus, the no sales tax the state had didn't hurt the case either. Well, the day of the trip I was excited. We lived maybe 3 hours from where they lived, so we headed out early. It was 10 in the morning when we arrived. The summer air was in full swing and the ocean was breathing salty. It wasn't as hot as one might expect in the summer, but it was pretty warm. We went over to the oceanside property and spent the rest of the morning and part of the afternoon hitting the shops and eating at one of the seafood restaurants. We then went back to their place to chill for a bit before we headed out to the dock. By then it was almost 5 in the afternoon, and the dock was part empty, probably because a lot of people had the same idea we had. When I first laid eyes on the SS Seafarer, I was stunned. Now, to me, this was a majestic beast. To John, it was a black cove. He had it since 2013, and he loved its roomy deck and single-engine prowess. I was in awe, though. I was excited to get on it. He gave me a tour of his beast before we set sail out into the Pacific. We sailed out far enough that we lost sight of land. He knew the sea well and knew where the international water were. After a bit of sailing, of which he let me take the helm, we stopped and looked out into the empty vastness, which is the Pacific Ocean. There he produced a cooler with drinks, and we sat on the deck and talked for hours. The change in temperature was noticeable, and when the sun set after 9 p.m., we had brought coats and sweaters as they had instructed, as they knew it would get a bit chilly. The moon was out, but it wasn't real bright. We stayed another hour talking and not thinking about the problems in the world or in our life for the moment. I was the first who heard a sound emanating from the Pacific waters. It was like a soft howl, but low enough that the others didn't seem to notice it. I heard it though, and began wondering what it could be. I was excited at the thought that it could be a whale. After a while, it did it again, only slightly louder. This time the others heard it as well. My wife looked around and asked what it was. Nina said she didn't know, and John began actively listen as I was. After a few minutes, the sound was heard again. This time, instead of a howl, it sounded more like a growl. I started to suspect that it wasn't a whale, and asked John if he had heard anything like that before. He said no. It got quiet again for a few minutes. My wife and Nina started to talk again when we heard a large splash, which sounded way off, but was loud enough for us to hear it. John said if it was a whale, the biggest one we got, and it did that in the distance, it still wouldn't have been that loud. The air suddenly turned foul and rancid. It was a horrible, putrid smell, like rotting fish and ass mixed with the salty air. My wife threw up, while I held down the best I could. Then we heard the loudest growl I've ever heard. This was loud, and it echoed through the air. Then we heard another loud splash. That's when John decided it was high time to get the hell out of here. As he raced to the helm to start the beast up, we heard a growl again. Only this time it echoed from under the water. As he started the engine, the boat rocked suddenly back and forth, as if a sudden wave had hit us. Once started, he tried to pull forward. We moved, then suddenly stopped. John pulled forward again, and then suddenly stopped. We weren't moving. He did pull forward again, this time increasing speed. We didn't move an inch. I think it dawned on John and I at the same time that something was holding the boat. John let off speed and stopped it altogether. We all realized in horror at the same time that the boat was starting to move on its own, out farther into the sea. John immediately started moving forward again. Then he reversed it, and then pulled forward again. This time we felt a jerk. Something was indeed holding on to the boat. He reversed again, and then pulled forward. This time it jerked, followed by what sounded like a screech coming from underwater. John did this again and again. The final time, he broke free. As he sped off, we heard a splash, followed by the loudest screeching roar I have ever heard. This too echoed through the air. We made it back to the dock, tired and exhausted, but most of all, relieved to be back on land. We drove back to their place, where we stayed the night in the guest room. The next morning, we discussed what happened over breakfast. John and I agreed that it was a sea monster of some sort. The girls weren't sure what it was, but didn't want to say it was a sea monster. John and I decided to head back to the dock that day. He wanted to inspect his boat. Seeing as it was dark out and the moon wasn't bright enough to really see anything. After noticing nothing around the boat, he decided to check under it. He pulled out a swimsuit and a breathing tank and jumped in. He was under there for a few minutes before he surfaced. As I helped him up, I noticed he looked a little shaken. When I asked him what was wrong, He looked at me with frightened eyes. He said that whatever it was out there, it must have been big. When he checked the bottom, he noticed indentations on it, as if something had grabbed onto it hard. And it was on both sides of the boat and ran the length of it. And he said that the propeller blades had bits of meat around it, which meant that when he broke free, he cut the thing in the process.
I've been waiting a relatively long while to post this, just because I'm still freaked out by the fact that this actually happened. Rewind 2 weeks. It's the 4th of July. A few of my friends want to actually do something, instead of just lounging in front of our computers like we do every day. There were 5 of us. Me, Neil, Elijah, JD, and Neil's sister, Katie. Neil had the idea to go to his grandparents' house, as they owned a farmhouse. We live in Texas, so having that much space, especially with other houses being half a mile out, it was the perfect place to pop fireworks without getting into much trouble. The drive from where we lived to their house was about a 40-mile drive. Unfortunately, the only car we had at our hands was a 2-door, so trying to fit 5 of us into one car was hectic to say the least. The drive was actually tolerable. 3 of my friends in the back found a comfortable yet funny position to sit in the car. The music Katie was playing was helping a lot and definitely passed the time. We all bought some fireworks halfway there, and my friends jumped back into their designated position for another 20 miles. As we got there, Neil forgot to mention that his grandparents were out of town for the week, which made the experience ahead of us even better. All of us got out of the car except for Katie, who suggested that she get us all the food and sodas for the night. She kept the fireworks in the back because she didn't want us popping any while she was gone. She drove off and all of us were left without any fireworks, so we did the next best thing and went into the pool in the back. Something that already put me off was that the ranch sat considerably close to a forest. Neil even went to the extra step to tell me that there's the occasional wolf that can be a hassle to deal with. Of course I got nervous because I had nothing to defend myself with if one jumped over the fence. He had handed me his pocket knife, saying that there's a shotgun in the living room if something goes down. He mentioned that he was going to set up a game of Risk for all of us to play while Katie was out, as the drive to the closest market was well over a couple of miles out. So Elijah and I sat poolside, telling stories to each other about stupid stuff that happened while we were in college. During our talk, I was staring out into the forest line, paranoid about the aforementioned wolves that Neil teased me about. I saw something move. I couldn't tell, since the porch light behind me was making it harder to see any details, but the way it moved made my heart jump. Elijah could see my body language change as I leaned in to see what was there. He started to ask me what I saw, and I replied with a wolf on the tree line. He looked towards where I pointed and he calmed down. "That's just Katie, dude. I think she's just trying to scare us." He started calling her name, waving his arm and laughing, saying how she scared the hell out of me. Neil came out of the house wondering what Elijah was screaming about. Then he saw his sister standing in the field. He started to laugh when Elijah told him what happened and how I was on the edge of my seat. JD came out of the house next, and Neil told him to help Katie with the bags and grab the fireworks. Katie, who was out in the field, started to wave back, but the wave definitely seemed out of place. It wasn't so much waving, but a sudden jerk, like if you were trying to pop your elbow. Elijah yelled for Katie to come back so we can start the party, but JD came back with a terrified look on his face. Katie's not back yet. I just called her. She's still on the road towards Walmart. Their laughing stopped, and Elijah's face faded, and his arms fell to his lap with a thud. Everyone looked at the still jerking figure in the field. Then she screamed. The scream was so loud, it sounded like it may as well have been a couple of feet in front of us. All of us scrambled, running back into the house, slamming the door behind us. Neil shouted for all of us to lock the doors and to grab the shotgun in the living room. I ran to grab his shotgun, as it was the closest thing to us, while the other 2 ran to each of the doors leading outside. Quickly, I grabbed the shotgun and stuffed a couple of shells into my pocket, running back to the kitchen, where we came in from, and handed the gun to Neil. I pulled out the shells and set them on the counter, and he loaded one in. JD came back nearly covered in sweat, freaking out and shouting, "What the fuck is that?" Just as scared as he was, I looked at both of them, Elijah quickly joining us again. "You don't think it was a skinwalker?" I read the stories. I've seen them all over 4chan and in creepypastas. JD tried reassuring us. "No, it can't be. It was just Katie. She was just trying to scare us." "Cut the bullshit, JD." Neil barked at him. "That scream wasn't human. You already called her, and you told us that she was still going out." He turned back to the door, pushing the blind slightly to find that Katie was closer to us. It stood at the gates of the pool, illuminated by the light and revealing to us something that didn't look much like Katie at all. The hair was a mess, and the clothes looked tattered, and her skin was bruised. The one thing that caught our eye the most was her face. The head was tilted, like it struggled to support the weight. The eyes were blank with emotion, and the jaw was agape. It raised an arm, jerking it like it did before in a mock wave. The jerking, however, started to move more violent, and the entire body started to shake uncontrollably. Neil quickly closed the curtains and backed off. He ordered us to sit around the counter. He sat himself in the gap leading to the kitchen, gun aimed at the door. It was silent for what felt like an hour. The three of us continued to look at Neil, who was completely focused on the door. A massive, grotesque smell entered our noses, and all of us reacted appropriately. The horrid stench was like if you left groceries to ferment in a box in the summer heat with a couple of carcasses as garnish. It was definitely hard to breathe, tasting the smell of the back of your throat, even with your nose pinched. It was so bad, JD actually ended up throwing up. Then, without any warning, the smell was gone. The hot air that was the smell went away, and was easier to breathe. I was afraid to let go of my nose, but was rewarded with a breath of fresh air. Everyone took a couple of breaths to rid their lungs of the pungent smell that lingered beforehand. Neil asked us if we were okay, and we all replied, JD being an exception, since he'd just puked. We heard what sounded like a whine. It sounded like a mix between a dog and a child about to cry. It wasn't coming from the porch door, but from the front where we came in from the car. All of us stood up, Neil moving forward while we stayed back. We knelt down by the stairs, still hearing this whining. It didn't hit me until we positioned ourselves, but it sounded like something was trying to talk for the first time, like an animal. In a raspy, but still high-pitched voice, I could make out a very small portion of what it was trying to say. It kept repeating this until it started to sound more enunciated, more human.
What the fuck? What was that?
It sounded like JD. Same accent, same speech pattern, the same voice. JD started to shiver. His breath was getting shallow. He shouted back in a scared voice I'd never heard come from his mouth until now. Get out. Leave us now. Get the fuck out.
Leave us alone. Get out.
Were the last words we heard in the same scream we heard when we saw it initially. It started to pound on the door, not like it was trying to force itself in, but like an impatient knock. It started to scream in the same pitch we heard when we initially saw it.
Get out! Get out! Get out!
It terrified all of us. The inhuman screams, the polite pounding on the door. I started crying. I thought this was it. Neil wasn't scared like us. He was right pissed. He stood up, storming towards the door, screaming. He swung open the door, pointing his shotgun at whatever was on the other side, pulling the trigger, filling our ears with the sound of the shotgun blast, and ringing to follow. Neil stood at the door, huffing. His body language was wanting to rip this thing apart. I stood up, looking past his arm, seeing nothing but a shell on the ground. I looked past his shoulders, seeing nothing but the driveway and the road leading back to where we came from. He turned around, the adrenaline fading away and a shaky voice coming from his mouth. We're not staying here, JD. Call Katie and tell her to get ready to go back home when she comes back. The rest of the time, all of us were in the kitchen. The shotgun sat on the counter with several shells near the butt of the gun. None of us wanted to say anything. None of us wanted to look at each other. It was nothing but silence until Katie called us. Neil quickly wrote a note, leaving it on the gun as we left. All of us hopped into the car silent. Katie noticed our behavior and constantly egged us to tell her what happened. She pouted and put music on the radio to cheer us up. The only thing I could hear was the blood-curdling scream, telling us to get out. When I was young, I lived in a quite small town in Queensland. The whole town was surrounded by bush in every direction for hundreds of kilometers, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the level of water would drop significantly, enough for us to camp in the riverbed. My best mate's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting the drinks for a little camping trip we had planned, so we could finally pop our drunk cherry. The place we had in mind was near an old indigenous settlement, where a few creepy things have happened to us over time. So we made our way down to the riverbank, which was low on the side we came in, and really high on the other side. You couldn't see on the other side through all of the trees on the top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing someone could be up there watching, and you wouldn't know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp, and our parents have no idea where we are or what we are doing. We lied and said we were staying at a friend's place. We set up camp and built a little shelter for us to sleep under. We are all set up and started drinking as the sun is setting. Soon it's dark and we are in full swing, mixing drinks and singing songs and throwing stuff in the water, and generally making a whole heap of noise. As we are starting to wind down, one of my friends says he saw something move at the top of the riverbank on the steep side. We all say that he is full of shit and should calm down, but he is adamant there is someone up there, so we all start calling out, "Come on out, pussy," and other such things, being brave well beyond our years. To our surprise, a bearded man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes came out of the tree line, stands on the edge of the bank and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something, but for about 5 minutes he just stands there, and then he retreats back into the tree line. We all talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget it. About an hour later the guy is back, but he isn't on the bank anymore. He is coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He comes over and stands next to the fire, and just joins our group of 12-year-old kids and stands there. We are all officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do, so we just sit there in silence. Eventually, one of my friends gets the courage and speaks to him. "Good day, mate. How are you? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend, and then just starts staring at each of us in turn for a little bit of time spent on each of us. My friend tries again. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your fucking business." And he hissed like a cat. Then this guy just jumps back screaming and staring at the fire like it had just appeared and runs up on the stink bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all stood there speechless. We decide that it's best if we just stoke the fire because it's about 39-kilometer walk in the pitch black to the town, and we weren't confident on that, so stoke the fire we did. We sat up for as long as we could, keeping watch, not really talking. We all eventually dozed off one by one. When we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, all of our shoes, all of our blankets, everything. The creepy thing is that none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind, and there was not a single footprint. We were sleeping in wettish sand, and there could have been footprints everywhere, but there were none. It looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed and ran most of the way back home. Our feet were all cut up and messy by the time we got back. We never told our parents about our camping trip, and I think we never will. I will try to keep this as short as possible. A few weeks ago, I was loading wood into my UTV at the bottom of the hill. It was at dusk. That detail might be important. I glanced up the hill and saw what looked like the silhouette of a cow head peeking around the corner. Thinking it was just a tree or something, I went about my business. I left a different way, then going up the hill and came back maybe 10 minutes later. When I looked up the same way, and it was gone. Still, I didn't really think much of it, but it was a bit odd. That was that for a while, until maybe a month or so later. It is dusk, and I'm walking around the woods with my dog. I had an axe, and I was digging around trying to use it to climb these cliffs. I was getting tired of it, and it was getting pretty dark, so I decided to head back. I looked over maybe 500 feet, and it looked like the same thing peeking out from behind a hill. I instinctively got creeped the fuck out, and started to make my way out of there, still trying to keep my cool. I looked back that way, and it was there, but looking at me from a different angle. It was facing me when I was at a different place, and then facing me again. I swear to God I saw it move or something as I started to haul ass out of there. As much as I could, I was in boots and going up a steep hill covered in trees and brush. Then I went inside, and here I am writing this. Tomorrow I plan on going down there with a gun and a friend in broad daylight, and go where I was and see if it's still there. If it is, I'll go see what it is, and if it's some log on the ground. If not, then I will be officially scared of the woods behind my house from now on. This family moves into a house in the backwoods of, I think, northern Arizona a few years ago, in 2013 or 2014. Rumor has it that the locals are quick to mention that it's best to stay indoors around twilight or dusk, and to not go outside too often, especially at night. They were supposedly told nothing else or given any reason as to why, only that it was best to retreat indoors when it starts to get dark, even on their own property yard, mind you. One late afternoon, this family's eldest son, in his early 20s, sees his mother standing silently at the end of the driveway just staring. He walks up and carries a brief conversation with her until his dad opens the door and calls for him to come in. As soon as he looks back, his mom is no longer there. He goes inside and sees his mom and dad downstairs in the dining room. He calls her out and she's completely confused and dumbfounded because she swears that she was inside the entire time. Strange occurrence, but none of them gave it much regard. Months pass and the son comes home one night. He parks in the driveway and his car is the last car parked, closest to the end of the driveway. His family was expecting him home already, but it is now almost 11ish. Don't know if the guy starts honking or what, but all I know is that his parents were worried and tried calling him, but to no avail. The dad soon realizes that the son's car is parked in the driveway, and as soon as he opens the front door, at least a dozen deer dart into the brush on both sides of the house. The father, startled and amazed, sees his son running scared shitless with tears in his eyes. He takes a few moments to calm down and recount what happened. The son claims that he arrived 45 minutes earlier, but after he parked his car and started to make his way to the front door, he was stopped by at least a dozen gray tabby cats that were surrounding the perimeter of the house. Every time he got closer to the door, they would hiss and try to swat and attack him. Apparently the guy was so scared that he decided to sit in the car sobbing until someone took notice and would come out to see and get him. Most people would think nothing of cats, let alone 12 plus, but this guy knew that something was not right about these quote-unquote cats.
And how they barricaded his way in.
Here's one of the creepiest encounters I've ever had, which took place in the spring of 2015. It is important to the story that I was basically a huge jerk leading up to what happened. See, I'm a graduate student, and I was at the point about 6 to 8 months into a new relationship with a woman named Sarah. If it matters, I am a female, and we were both around 30 at this time. The prior year, before I met Sarah, my best bud from school, Josh, and I had gone to a great camping/road trip over the spring break. This year, I messed up and basically double booked myself to go camping with Josh and with my girlfriend because I am a scatterbrained idiot, and I got confused about the plans that had been discussed and solidified. Both Josh and Sarah were justifiably really pissed off and hurt, but I had made the plan with my girlfriend first, ultimately, so I had to flake on Josh. When it came time to planning, Sarah and I picked a campground in southwestern Pennsylvania with lots of good hiking. It's at least a 5-hour drive from where I live, and we made reservations and I mentioned the plan to Josh. Well, it turns out, all of the campgrounds in the region, Josh had also decided to head to that one, as it connected to a long bike trail he wanted to go on. He had decided to go camping alone, so we knew Josh would be at the campground before we got there. But things were super awkward between me and him, on account of my being an asshole and him being generally a bit depressed around that time. We stayed 3 nights and Josh was there for the first and second night. We rented out a small cabin, basically a pre-furbished with bunk beds. Because it was cheap and we had a leash-reactive, wimpy, about-rein dog, it seems nothing easier that way. Josh was tent camping in another spot. I think Josh and I were mostly planning on avoiding each other. He was rightfully still angry. Things were awkward and I figured he needed some space from me. But it turned out only the bathroom was open on our side of the campground. Since it was only early April, and most of the campground was still closed down for the season, Josh's campsite was right next to the open bathroom, so we ended up seeing him when we walked to the bathroom at night. I saw/heard signs of 1 or 2 other groups on the far side of the campground, but they had their own bathroom open over there, and we never really saw them. It's a very large and forested campground, and only small sections at either end were open for the reason. The second night, Josh was out of his campsite when he came through the bathroom before bed. It was right after midnight at this point, and Josh seemed super depressed, and we had a very strange and awkward conversation with him. It took care of what we needed to do in the bathroom and headed back to our little shed down the road. The roads in this part of the campground were basically like an inverted F, with the bathroom above the top of the F, and between the 2 arms of the F was a stand of trees next to the main road, a small, locked shower building, and Josh's campsite, furthest from the main road being the vertical line of the F. We were staying off the main road further down the opposite side, so that night we could pass Josh's camp and get to the bathroom, but on the way back we followed the road so as not to bother him, as he seemed in a bad mood. It was dark and I'm easily spooked. We had the dog with us, which was somewhat reassuring since he looked semi-tough despite being a nutcase and a wimp. But I'm looking around nervously as I glance over my shoulder. I think I see a man off to the side of us. My brain processes this very slowly as I caught a glimpse of him as I turned my head. And it was very dark. I convinced myself my mind was playing tricks. I didn't look back and silently walked with Sarah and the dog back to our cabin. We go back to the cabin. I thought Sarah looked a little spooked, which is unusual since she is a lot braver than me. Eventually, she says that guy was really creepy, right? So shit, he was real. I told her I saw him, but I convinced myself my eyes were playing tricks on me. But no, we both saw someone with no flashlight standing in the trees just off the road, maybe 15 feet from us. I asked if it might have been Josh. Neither of us were really convinced, but wanted to convince ourselves so we would get some sleep. And he had been wandering around, being moody 15 minutes before, and it was right by his campsite. I think we didn't want to freak ourselves out any further, so we locked the cabin and didn't talk about it much more. The next morning, it was pouring rain, so Josh decided to pack up and leave early instead of spending the day in the area. We shouted goodbye to him as we headed to the bathroom, and he ran around tossing shit in his trunk and trying not to get drenched. That night was a weekend, and there was a big family in the next cabin next to ours, and everything felt less spooky. But when we got back to town a day later, I texted Josh asking him if he'd been lurking creepily in the woods. He said no. Well, I told him what we'd seen, and he said he'd seen a guy the prior night lurking in the woods without a flashlight. Same general description, which I'll get to. Same area. The guy had really creeped him out, so much so that the next day he brought the biggest mag light he could find. So he'd have more than just a pocket knife to defend himself. But he'd mostly convinced himself it was a park ranger. Yeah, with no flashlight, let alone a vehicle, but he more than less willed himself to believe so he could get some sleep. So once we could no longer pretend it was Josh, Sarah and I compared notes. What we both saw, and what Josh saw the night before, was this. A tall, gaunt white man in his late 40s, with clean, shaven, sunken cheeks, in the stand of trees bramble just off the road. In the space between the arms of the F,
He was wearing a raincoat, rubber boots, and a hat, and had no flashlight. He was standing still and staring coldly in our direction. I remember his raincoat, his sunken face, and how very cold his gaze felt. In contrast, Josh is several inches shorter than whoever we saw, and was not wearing a raincoat that night, which we knew because we had just seen him. But we convinced ourselves otherwise. Bearded, 29 years old at the time. I should add, it wasn't raining. To be clear, where this guy was not somewhere you'd be strolling through. It was a thick brambly area. We had made the effort to move out of the road and stay in the shadows and away from the bright bathroom light, both nights. We're sure he wasn't going to the bathroom. Though we were on the woman's side, you can hear the men's side clearly, and Joss had been outside in view of the bathroom doors both nights. He didn't look like he lived in the woods, which is to say he appeared clean and groomed, and his clothes weren't worn or dirty. Whatever he may have been doing in the middle of the night in a nearly abandoned campground with no flashlight, he was clearly making the effort
Not to be seen.
This story happened about 2 years ago, while I was in university working on my degree in biology. I had signed up for a trip to gather samples for an experiment some students in the ecology department were going to run. It required the collection of samples from several sites, so they recruited biology, ecology, and forestry majors to help them complete the sampling in a shorter period. The area my group was to take samples from was a few hours from my uni in the Pacific Northwest. There are 9 of us in my group, 8 students and a supervising professor. We got to the campsite in the late evening and set up our tents. One of the other students had brought a big container of split pea soup from home and was sharing it with the others on the trip. I don't really care for it, so I declined the offer. Everyone had some except for me, one other student, and the professor. Come the next morning, the 5 students who had eaten the soup weren't in the best of shape. They were in the grips of some gnarly food poisoning and were in no shape to hike for 8 or 9 hours to collect the samples we needed. The professor who was supervising us had originally had some rules, such as people traveling in groups of at least 2, and we had to return to camp by nightfall. Now, those rules were tossed out to make sure we kept to our timetable and collected all of the required samples. We were just told to do your best to complete the work assigned, as long as you can do it safely. That morning, I set out for a long day of hiking. After a mile or so, I ran into the stream I was supposed to follow. I needed to travel about 4 miles upstream, stopping every quarter mile to collect samples of the water and soil. This meant I had to hustle to get back before dark. Halfway through the day, I realized that wasn't going to happen. About 2 miles into my hike, I stopped for lunch, sitting on a log overlooking the stream. The scene was extremely peaceful until I smelled cigarettes. It wasn't exactly the smell of a cigarette being smoked, more the musty smell of a heavy smoker's car where cigarette butts must have been left to ferment for weeks on end. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. I just assumed that the wind had blown the scent of some hunter or hiker over to me. But minutes later, the smell hadn't faded. The vegetation in the area wasn't that thick, but there was still a lot of places for someone to duck behind a tree or a bush. I was unnerved that someone was apparently staying close enough to me for me to smell them for this long, without so much as a word. I quickly packed up the trash from my lunch and continued up the stream. The musty smell went away for the next few hours. It wasn't until I arrived at my last sample location late into dusk that I smelled it again. The woods were getting really dim at this point. Looking back on it, it was a really stupid idea to stay out so late just hiking back to camp in the dark. It would be really dangerous even without a cigarette-smoking stalker. Having just put the collection tubes in my bag, I shined my flashlight around the darkening woods, looking for whoever was giving off the smell. I didn't see anything that caught my attention. It would actually be more correct to say I saw too many things in the dim light that might have been a head sticking out from behind a tree or someone crouched low in the foliage. I didn't like the idea of being in the dark woods with a stranger who, for the second time, was lurking near me without revealing themselves. So I began to double time it back down the stream. I made much better time on my way back down, though it was dark, because I didn't have to stop to take any samples. Even so, I didn't get back to camp till a bit before 10. I was the last one to get back, and everyone but the professor was already asleep. I didn't mention the cigarette smell to the professor because he seemed tired as it was, and he headed to his bed in the RV soon after I got back. I headed to my tent soon after. At some point in the night, I woke up needing to pee. I decided to head into the woods to do my business, as I knew some of the other students were still feeling ill and needed the RV toilet for more urgent matters than having to take a leak. I walked about 100 feet into the woods, found a tree, and did what I needed to do. As I turned to go back to camp, something caught my eye. Somewhere off in the woods, there was a tiny red glow. I was confused as to what it was until it flared momentarily and I realized it was the cherry of a cigarette. I stood there for a while watching the red ember glow, fade, then move slightly closer to the ground as whoever was smoking would take it out of their mouth. Not being able to see the person, I assumed they were watching the camp. I didn't know if they had seen me make my way into the woods or not, as the fire had been doused and the moon was only half full, so there wasn't very much light. I made my way slowly back to camp as quietly as I could and entered the RV to wake up the professor. I told him about the person smoking in the woods and about the smell of cigarettes earlier that day. However, when we got outside the RV, the ember from the cigarette was gone. My professor woke the other students who hadn't come down with food poisoning, and we took turns watching over camp. I didn't see or smell anything else when I was on guard duty, and went to sleep when the professor woke up for his turn. In the morning, the professor and the other students and I went to where I guessed the smoker had been standing the night before, and sure enough, we found about 10 cigarette butts on the ground next to a tree. The tree itself looked like someone had been twisting and stabbing a knife or other sharp object into it, as the bark and outer layers of wood had been damaged and chipped away. The professor decided that the group should head back that day even though we hadn't collected all the samples we were assigned, just to be on the safe side. We packed up camp and drove down the thin dirt trail without incident. The second we got onto the paved highway, a white paneled van pulled out of a clearing just off the shoulder and began following us. This van stayed behind us all the way back, pulling off the highway when we did, taking the same surface streets we did, and only stopped following us when we turned onto the road leading to our university campus. Everyone was freaked out by this, but it was around 9 at night on a weekend, so the security office on campus was closed. We decided to unload the RV and call it a night, as the van hadn't followed us onto campus. I offered to help the professor catalog and store the collection tubes from our trip, so it was another couple hours before I left the biological sciences building and started heading toward the dorm building I lived in. I stepped out into the cool night air and began walking, my professor having left the building in another direction to get to his car and drive home. It was a couple dozen feet outside of the building, which was now locked, when I was hit with the musty smell of old cigarettes. I looked around, and about 25 yards away in the darkness, off of the footpath, I saw the cherry of a cigarette smoldering away. I was pretty scared at this point, but hoped it was only a student or some faculty staying late and having a smoke. I couldn't completely convince myself of this, as the musty cigarette smell was the same as what I had smelled in the woods the previous night. I started down the footpath and soon passed whoever was smoking. 100 feet or so later, I looked over my shoulder and saw the cigarette cherry bobbing in the darkness. The smoker was following me. This creeped me out a bit more, but I still held it together. That is until I rounded a small stand of trees and saw a white paneled van parked alone in a parking lot. I took off and sprinted toward my dorm building. I looked over my shoulder a few steps into my run and saw the cherry of the cigarette fall to the ground and the dark shape beginning to move after me. I didn't look back again, but I could hear someone running in the grass off of the footpath. I got to the entrance to my dorm building and frantically waved my keycard in front of the door. As soon as I heard the soft beep, I opened the door, jumped through the doorway, and shut the door quickly. I stopped and peered through the glass door. I saw the dark shape stop just short of the lit pathway. I just watched for a minute or two. Then I saw the spark of a lighter. The light is just barely bright enough to illuminate a shaggy beard and the brim of a baseball cap before it disappears and was replaced with the red glow of a cigarette. I turned and headed up the stairs to my dorm room. By the time I get to my window overlooking the same yard I had just run through, there is no trace of a dark figure or a cigarette cherry. After that, I didn't see that white paneled van again or smell that musty cigarette smell, and I hope I never do.
It's been 11 days since my first post, and you guys gave me some good tips and seemed to like it. Hopefully, this will be the last time I have to post this. For some background, this happened back in 2003 when I was 6 years old. I'm from Michigan, and this experience takes place over the summer. In the area I live, we have a community pool that everyone who lives in the community is welcome to use. A special event this pool throws is called Midnight Swim. The whole point of this is that in the day the pool is open at 12 a.m. The pool usually closed at 9 p.m. on Monday through Thursday, and Sunday and Saturday at 10 p.m. The midnight swims were held on Friday nights. There are 3 midnight swims held each summer, and as a kid it was an event my brother, also 6 at the time of the story, and I always looked forward to. Before you think I had bad parents for letting 2 6-year-olds stay out swimming until midnight, my brother and I were an excellent swimmer since we learned how to swim at 3 years old, and for being out till 12 a.m., we lived in a safe neighborhood where nothing ever happened. On this particular day, we had to wait until 9 p.m. before we could go to the pool because my parents had to work late and our sitter didn't want to leave our house to take us to the pool. So 9 o'clock rolls around and my brother and I are ready to go. My parents get home and get ready themselves. As my parents are getting ready, me, being my 6-year-old self, get bored and decide to wait for them on the front porch. A little layout of my neighborhood. There's a main road just left of my house. Anyways, I'm walking around my front lawn when I hear a voice call out to me saying, "Hey kid, come over here." At first, I had thought the voice was going from inside my head. Don't judge me, I was 6. But after hearing the voice call out a few more times and looking around, I spot a man standing in the shadows of some trees. My parents had taught me not to talk to strangers, but I was standing right in front of my house and thought I would be safe. I asked the man what he wanted, and he said he wanted to show me something. Realizing there was something strange with how that man hadn't come out of the shadows, I told the man no, and I was going back inside. The man didn't like this one bit. He scolded me for not listening to my elders and to do as he said. At this point, I was shocked. I didn't expect this man to yell at me, but stupidity. I decided not to go inside and stay on the porch. I told the man I didn't know him, to which he replied that he was a friend of my parents and that they wouldn't mind me going over to talk to him. It was at this point my dad walked out and asked me who I was talking to, but by the time I had pointed to the trees, the man was gone. So to the man that tried to lure a 6-year-old boy into the shadows, let's not meet ever again.
It was almost 20 years ago now since this happened, so I'm pretty sure no one is in imminent danger. My family has some property that backs up to Carson National Forest in New Mexico. It's been in the family for years, and my sister and I both spend our summers up there. It's gorgeous. Well, it is for people who lived out in far west Texas. Nice and green, cool mountain air in the summer. It was always a relief to get up there and away from the dusty ranch. My dad was ex-military, and having 2 daughters, let's just say we did lots of outdoor stuff. He taught us survival skills and how to defend ourselves. We hunted and fished and did lots of camping and hiking. To us, it was always a fun time, but I guess he felt the need to pass his skills on to us. We spent several weeks in the summer up there hiking with him and exploring the old cabins, mining communities, and checking the Big Ditch project that was built for Red River back in the late 1800s. At least I think that's the correct date for that project, but I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a great place to hike with some beautiful high mountain lakes, streams, lots of wildlife, etc. Now this happened when I was in college and my younger sister was still in high school. My dad was still at home having to work and would come up every few weeks to spend time with us. We were up there with our mom and she mainly spent time in town or around the property painting. We spent our time on the Jeep trails or hiking and sleeping. It was late June, maybe early July, I think, and we had decided we were going to hike up to Lost Lake. It's one of my favorite lakes up there because if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like a heart. We set off in the morning, and we were prepared. We both had a small pack, water, snacks, and we both had a small hammock we planned to set up once we got to the lake, so we could just enjoy the area for a while. I will admit to being an outdoor type and swear when it's quiet enough, you can hear the trees talk. We also both always carried a knife when we hiked. My dad always insisted we have something just in case an accident happened or we just needed it. The hike was going good. Since the summer cabin is pretty far up the valley, we just set out on foot to the trailhead. To get to Lost Lake, you take another trail that goes up to Middle Fork Lake. Then you break off that trail for Lost Lake. We run into a few other hikers, but they're going to Middle Fork Lake. And we were pleased because it looked like we could possibly have Lost Lake all to ourselves. It's a pretty good hike with some long switchbacks, but totally worth it because the lake is just beautiful and a very pretty emerald green in color. We got there and saw that we did have the lake to ourselves. We hiked around the lake and decided to hike back a bit to find a good spot to set up our hammocks. We walked into the tree line and the first thing my sister said was, "Do you smell that?" And yes, I did. It was a dead animal with a strong scent of blood. We had both done lots of hunting and knew that smell. And that's when I saw it. It was a deer carcass, but what was around it was what disgusted me. Placed around the deer carcass in a circle were its organ, entrails, etc. But it wasn't like it was being cleaned. It's like they were placed in a certain arrangement, with little piles of rocks in between everything. Now, I know how some people get disgusting with their kills, and I have had some guys try to gross me out, but I don't fall for crap like that. This made me uneasy. It wasn't just being cleaned. It was like it was set up in a certain meaning, or it had meaning. I stepped back from this weird circle, and then my sister starts to say my name but stops. Because then we see the guy who had done this. And he looks like he just climbed out from inside the deer because he is covered in blood and doesn't have much clothing on. At first I thought he didn't have anything on, but honestly, I didn't try to check him out much. He was standing back away from his gruesome little circle, just standing close to a group of trees that were pretty close together. He was maybe 20 feet from us. I think maybe he was trying to hide. Not for sure, but my dad had always taught us that if we ever found ourselves in a situation where we didn't feel in control, to do everything in our power to try to take control on the situation. Do something that is going to take the other person by surprise. Don't do what they expect you to do. So this was raging through my brain. And I could also tell my sister was about to freak the fuck out, so I stepped up and said, "Hey, pretty good kill you got there. Did you use a bow?" The guy just stood there, his eyes all crazy wide, like he was stoked out of his brain on planet Pluto. So I'm thinking, great. We ran into a guy getting his hunt on, and he lost it and was getting blood crazy with his deer. He was staring me down, and I was staring right back, and my sister was getting ready to run. I still don't know what came over me, but I then put my hand on my knife that I kept on my waist just to show him that I wasn't completely helpless. I don't know why I did it, but something told me to let him know that I wasn't going to back down or be afraid. I kept eye contact with him, and I would guess he was maybe in his early 30s. But I'm bad at guessing people's ages. He was pretty dirty, though. You could tell that even with all the blood he had everywhere. I start to back off, and my sister had moved behind me, so I spoke again and said, "So, you have a great hunting day?" Again, the crazy didn't say a thing, just stood there like he was a statue or something, or like he thought I couldn't see him if he didn't move or make any sound. We moved back to the lakeside again and booked it around the lake. My sister stayed up front, as she was shaking pretty bad. I was mainly pissed off at first because if he wanted to get all crazy in the woods with his deer, then he should have gone further back up in the forest. We get back to the trailhead and stopped to get our bearing and looked at each other. I was scanning the forest line to make sure we weren't being followed, and my sister was just in shock. We started down the trail pretty fast, and I was hoping I could keep my sister together until we could at least reach the Middle Fork Lake Trail, or that we could even run into some more hikers. But the odds weren't good on this particular trail because you have to get an early start on Lost Lake Trail, and by now, it's late morning, almost noon. We were making good time and hadn't discussed what we saw, just started hiking back down. I started to get that feeling when you know you are not alone. I kept checking, but I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything at first either. My sister refused to look back and just kept going, but I felt that I had to keep checking to make sure the idiot wasn't following us. That's when the first stuff came flying at us. It was some small pebbles, but it really pissed me off because it was obvious someone was throwing them at us, and it could only have been him. My sister was almost running at this point, but I'm a mouthy smartass, and damn it, this was my forest. I had grown up here. These were my lakes, my trails, and I wasn't about to let some crazy dude ruin it for me. I started yelling back that he needed to go back to his deer and leave us alone. At this point, my sister is telling me to shut up and just come on. And I'm thinking, no way. This guy is just trying to scare us. The pebbles stopped. And then we started hearing barking and growling noises. My sister said, "Now he's growling at us?" And I just told her to get on down the trail and ignore it. He was behind us pretty much the entire way, growling and making these barking noises every once in a while, but I never caught a glimpse of him. Once we got close to where the trail joined in with the Middle Fork Trail, he seemed to back off. I never caught sight of him behind us, but I could hear him and I just knew he was there. We started down the rest of the trail. My sister refused to stop or look behind her, so I kept checking every so often. Didn't see anything or hear anything. We started to discuss what had happened, and she felt like he was very sinister and felt like we had been in a dangerous situation. I felt like he was just getting his kicks out of scaring two girls. I mean, he had to have heard us coming around the lake. We weren't being quiet. It was the opposite because there are black bears up there and we would always be pretty loud while hiking, hoping to scare off any bear in the area so we wouldn't come up on one. We told our parents, and my dad didn't like what he heard. He did teach us some more up-close defense skills after that day and forbid us from ever hiking alone or just the two of us again. We didn't hike up that trail for several years with anyone. It freaked my sister out, and I just didn't like remembering a time when I was scared in the forest that I considered my own. I didn't know it at the time, but after we had gotten back to the house and told my mom, she had called some neighbors and a few of the men hiked up there the next day to check things out. They did find the deer carcass and some empty hiking packs. They also found a rustic campsite further back in the woods that had been cleared out as well.
I was walking in the backwoods behind the Hickory Lane Trailer Park near Diamond, Missouri. It was a nice spring day when I started my walk. The birds were singing and the leaves were just budding out. I was near a small open area in the woods when I heard a sound, which sounded like something hitting wood. Now I had heard some stories of a Bigfoot in the woods, and I was thinking I was hearing wood knocks. After a few minutes, the knocking ended, and soon I heard something walking through the underbrush. Soon, what I saw made me pinch myself. It was a man, dressed in what appeared to be medieval clothes, mainly a blue-colored shirt, brown pants, and a red hood. He had on brown leather boots and a belt. On his back was a bundle of wood, and in his hand was a small axe. But what shocked me was the fact that this man was only 3 feet tall. He walked into the clearing and soon saw me. The man turned his face, and I saw that his face was clean-shaven. Blue eyes looked at me as soon as he said, "Good afternoon," and soon walked away in the woods. I at first thought it was some person who was a midget who might have had a house in the woods, but later I checked Google Maps and soon found out there were no houses in those woods. I'm still wondering if I really seen a real dwarf. This is an encounter my girlfriend and her friend had a few years ago. Not mine personally.
I'm a long-time lurker here, and I love reading stories about weird and unexplainable humanoid/creature encounters like Bigfoot, extraterrestrials, and the like. I've heard her tell the story a few times before, but after recently hearing them together described what they saw, I thought maybe you guys would enjoy it. Maybe someone has seen something similar. This encounter happened in Lakewood, New Jersey a few years back. It was past midday sometime in September. My girlfriend and her friend used to jog together regularly at local parks. The park they were at this particular day is called Lake Carolastro, which butts up to a housing development. The trail they were on loops around the lake, and 3/4 of the trail is basically just a normal paved sidewalk that follows a road, but eventually turns to dirt and through a small wooded area on the far side of the lake. The other 1/4 of the trail, mind you, this place is far from being remote. It is Jersey after all. While jogging through the wooded part of the trail, they come upon a creepy humanoid-looking figure on the edge of the trail that stopped them both in their tracks. They both keep referring to this thing as troll-like. It was short and maybe 4 feet tall at most. It was dressed in a long black hooded cloak hunched over sitting on wooded chest. Yes, a wooded fucking chest. Exactly like the kind you would imagine a troll to be sitting on. They said they could not see any face at all because its head was directed at the ground and the hood was too long. But what they did notice was the cloak was short enough to see part of its legs, and it was wearing what looked like regular flesh-colored stockings and had very small, clubbed feet. Its legs and large protruding boils or tumors, like lumps on exposed skin. It was wearing blue gloves too. Terrified, they eventually made their way past this thing, coming only a few feet from it, hoping it wouldn't jump out at them. Then, they noped the hell out of there faster than they could have ever ran before. It didn't say anything or try to cause them any harm, just sat there hunched over. They thought at first maybe it was a mannequin or something someone put there as a joke, but they noticed hand movement right before they passed it. Needless to say, they never gone back to this lake ever again. Every time my girlfriend talks about this encounter, I can hear the fear in her voice trembling, and was obviously somewhat traumatized by this encounter. Even though I geek out about these types of stories all the time, she has absolutely zero interest in any of these stories. She will roll her eyes and shake her head and tell me I'm crazy when I talk about how cool her story was. I was out with a friend last night. On a spur-of-the-moment decision, we decided we wanted to poke around in a graveyard. We have a few in the area that are locally famous for being allegedly haunted, and it's pretty late at night, late enough that it was pitch black without light. By the time we got to the graveyard, it was probably about 10:30 p.m. So this graveyard we were going to was kind of out of the way, in a woodsy area without many houses and kind of away from town. There were a few street lamps in front of the cemetery, but otherwise it was pretty dark. The gate was locked, and we pulled it a bit and figured we would just hop over the small wooden fence that was on the front of the cemetery. But at the last second we decided to leave. It was starting to drizzle, and we heard thunder and saw lightning in the distance as we drove over. But we thought it was out of the way and we didn't want it to rain on us. We got back into the car and pulled out to leave, and that was when I saw it. So here's some context for the setting. Like I mentioned, it was dark, and there were some street lamps. But from the road, the street lamps only give enough light to see the first or second rows of gravestones. The graveyard itself isn't very large, but it backs into the woods that definitely could be visible at daytime. Again, it was very dark. So, I was in the car and I saw this tall, gray blurry humanoid appearing thing. I couldn't make out any arms or legs. It didn't have horns or anything. But again, it was a significant distance. I know it was tall because again, it was quite far back in the grave, and it was nowhere near the gravestones that were really weird shade of gray. I want to reiterate, it was nowhere near the light, but I could still see it was gray, but not like glowing or anything. I don't know, it was weird. I couldn't make out any discernible facial features or anything. Again, I couldn't see its arms or legs because of the distance, but it didn't look like it was wearing clothes or like a robe or anything, which is one of the reasons why I'm not sure if it was a ghost or something else. I made a post about what I saw on Facebook, in one of my private groups, and my friends were all saying it was probably someone in the graveyard, someone wearing bright clothes, etc. I'll debunk these claims by saying it was too tall to be a regular person. And if someone was wearing bright clothes, 1, bright gray isn't a thing, 2, unless they meant like a reflector vest or some sort. But if they were wearing something reflective, it would have shown from either the light in the graveyard or from our cars we were pulling in and out. And it wouldn't have been accounted for a full-figured, humanoid shape anyways. Someone else tried to debunk my claims by saying I saw what I wanted to see, and I'm going to refute this also by saying I didn't expect to see anything at the cemetery, because personally, I think 99% of ghost stories are hoaxes. I am writing on behalf of a business friend who I visited in September of 2015. He lives in Tokyo, Japan. While I was there, he told me of an incident that occurred while he and his fiancée traveled to Mount Fujiyama Kamataki Shrine. They had been at the shrine and local sites throughout the day. While they were leaving the parking lot, they both noticed a strange-looking man crouched down by a tree near the edge of the forest. My friend slowed down his car as they continued to watch this man. The forest was dark, but they could see a halo of red light over his head. About that time he turned and stood up. Instantly a pair of huge dark butterfly-like wings sprung open from his back and he shot up into the canopy. As it ascended, they noticed the wings reflected light. Then they noticed that 2 older women had been watching this man as well, who screamed and ran away towards a nearby building. Other people then reacted to the screams and were looking towards the forest. My friend did not stay and drove off. They were both frightened and his fiancée cried most of the way home. I was shocked by their encounter and started to look on the internet after I returned home to NSW, Australia. I then read about the Mothman incidents and other strange winged humanoids. I talked to my friend and he said that someone had told him the same thing and that it had been seen in Japan. January 1st, 1970. It was the New Year's Day, but it was supposed to be a routine morning shift at Kawachan District Hospital. Nurse Doreen Kendall had started her shift at midnight and was due to get off at 8 a.m. Not much of a great way to greet the new year, but it was her job. Doreen, a practical nurse, worked on the 2nd floor of a hospital at Duncan on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. Doreen lived in Nanaimo and commuted 26 miles to Duncan. At 5 a.m., Doris and Nurse Frida Wilson began their usual morning rounds in a 4-bed ward. While Frida attended to the patient nearest the door, Doreen checked on the patient in the next bed, nearest the window, as she did every morning. She went to open the drapes in order to let in a little of the early morning sunshine. When she opened the drapes, she was amazed to see something totally unexpected. Outside, about 60 feet away, a flying object was hovering at height of about 60 feet. Even with the 3rd floor of the hospital, the object was saucer-shaped, with a transparent bubble-like dome in the center and was tilted slightly towards her. Because the object was tilted towards her, Doreen could see inside the transparent dome, where she saw 2 humanoid figures standing in front of a chrome, dial-covered instrument panel. She estimated the figures to be about 6 feet tall, wearing dark clothing and some sort of headgear. There were seats in front of the instrument panel, but the figures were standing rather than seated. Doreen was stunned. The Kawachan area had reported as a UFO hotspot, but she had never expected to see one herself. As she watched one of the men notice her and touch the other, apparently to alert him of the fact that they were being watched, the other man looked up and then manipulated a control, causing the object to begin to move. At this point, Doreen called Frida Wilson, who came to the window in time to see the object outside. The 2 then ran to the nurse's station and told 3 other nurses, who reached to the window in time to see the object, although it was some distance away by then. The object circled several times and then vanished to the northeast at high speed. The sighting was never explained. I don't expect anyone to believe this, and I don't blame you if you don't. Sometimes I'm not sure if I believe it myself, Regardless, this is 100% true. I was driving in the woods years ago. It was a pretty familiar area. To this day, I can drive to the exact spot it happened. It was summer and I drive a convertible, so the top was down, maybe somewhere around 2 a.m.-ish. It was a very clear night, but it had stormed earlier. Not really relevant, just trying to give as much detail as I can. On the horizon, of the right side of my car, I see flashes of amber light in the distance. At first I thought it was an emergency vehicle, but I know the area well and there was no road where the lights were coming from. Nothing but woods for miles. In fact, I almost crashed the car trying to figure out the lights. There was a tree down in the middle of the road and I almost hit it from the storm. I have to stop the car and turn around. It's a 2-lane road with no lights nearby whatsoever. Nothing but starlight in my headlights. As I turn my car around, in the middle of the road, my headlights land on this thing. I guess. Whatever it is, it was 8 feet tall at least. At least that's my best guess. It was so much taller than me at 6 feet. I stopped my car. Why I did so, I couldn't tell you. I don't know myself. But I did, and shut off the headlights. And this thing, it was definitely humanoid. And definitely not human. It had some sort of luminescence about it. Its skin glowed a dull white light. The thing started to move towards the car and was making terrible noises, hoarse moaning noises. That's the best way I can describe the sound it made. As it got closer, I could make out its features. I wear glasses and my prescription is very outdated. I know, bad idea driving at night like that, but anyway. Again, it was very tall and very thin. I remember thinking if it was human, it would have starved to death long ago. Its arms were out of proportion, as was its neck. They were abnormally long. Its arms were nearly to its knees. It had wrinkled, worn, leathery-looking skin, which was the purest white I had ever seen. The wrinkles of its skin made it look impossibly old. It folded over itself over and over again. The best way to describe it would be looking like a combination of maggot, birch bark, and wet newspaper. Like if you cut your finger and wear a bandage way too long, and you take the bandage off and the skin is sickly white and wrinkled. That.
But everywhere.
The closer it got, I could see more. Its eyes, or apparent lack thereof. They just looked like large, deep, dark holes. Its mouth was crooked and way too wide. If it had ears, the corners of the mouth would be right up to them. This moaning, limping, shuffling thing came too close for comfort finally, and I had seen enough. I started my car and took the Nope train right out of there. I drove 90 all the way home. In hindsight, I regret leaving. I had the strong impression after the fact that that thing was injured or sick or even dying. It did not look well, and whatever it was, I think perhaps it only wanted help. In hindsight, I hope that it found help, or at least came to a swift end, as it was obviously suffering. The witness was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when a very bright, white light entered the room. Then 3 or 4 humanoids entered her room apparently, through the walls and stood by her bed. These beings were described as 5 foot tall, wide and heavy-set with large eyes and pupilless eyes, no ears or hair, with dark bluish skin. Their hands were very large with thick fingers and nails. They wore white coats down to their ankles. She was asked to come with them and follow them down the street. There, she saw a group of about 30 women walking towards the river. All appeared to be in a trance. She felt drawn to the river, and once there, she observed 3 brightly lit hovering disc-shaped objects, a tall, thin female humanoid with huge black eyes, and wearing a flowing black robe appeared to be in charge. She was called by this being and asked to perform a test-type task. Next, she found herself standing by foot of her bed, with the short, stocky being struggling with her. In an attempt to give her an injection, a long needle was inserted to her shoulder and a white substance was removed. My friend and I were fishing in an evening friendly bass tournament, 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Smith and Sayla's Reservoir. The fishing picked up as tournament ended, so I convinced my friend to go back out for night bites. Somewhere around 11 p.m. we were fishing at the end of the peninsula, facing the shore with a dark, empty house on the land. It was very quiet, but I thought a helicopter was coming down in the cove behind the house where we couldn't see. But no noise. I gestured to my friend, but when the lights dimmed, we accused it as vehicle lights. Must have come down the road and backed away, but we never saw a vehicle. We continued fishing towards the shore in plain view of the house, when I noticed what looked like children playing with flashlights moving frantically in one of the rooms. My fishing partner and I decided people must have come to the house, even though we've never seen a car or people, and the power must be turned off in the house. We continued fishing, and almost immediately, although we never seen or heard anyone, there was an abnormally 7-foot-tall human-shaped figure with a smaller child-sized human-shaped figure, with the larger one looking like it was holding a flashlight looking for frogs and such at the waters. The odd thing was the way they were illuminating, almost like glow in the dark, but we dismissed that it was a flashlight reflecting off the water back at them strangely. Just then we noticed about 15 to 20 glowing-shaped figures. glowing-shaped figures all on the shore. They were all facing us in different sizes, and we got freaked out because there was never any noise this whole time, and we were close enough to have heard people walking in the brush near the shore. Just as we were getting scared and contemplating leaving, the flashlight the first big human-like figure was holding shined directly towards our boat. My partner said to start the motor and let's get out of here. As I start the boat and set the choke and pull the cord of the small 5-horsepower outboard motor, the flashlight levitated across about 40 yards across the water, and I was keeping half an eye on it and starting the motor. When it turned over and I put it in gear, I looked up and the light was about 8 feet above our small boat. I never looked back, and it was a short 3-minute ride back to the boat ramp. We hurried, throwing the boat in the van, and got inside the van in shock. All the dogs on the lake were barking loudly. I've had the opportunity to tell the story a couple of times, but it still weirds me out with each retelling. Back in the summer of 2010, I stalled my horse at a public boarding facility, meaning that many people would have come and go at all hours of the day. Being that it was summer in the south, I would typically come late in the evening, around 8 p.m. or 11 p.m., to train after it cooled off. As this was a barn, there were always barn cats everywhere. People would drop off unwanted kittens. Mama cats would have kittens in the spring. You get the gist of it. About a week before the event I witnessed, I was told about how a barn hand's new dog, an Australian Shepherd I think, on the premises would pick up the kittens by the scruff of their neck, walk them over to the horse watering trough, get them in the trough, dunk his head under the water, and hold his breath until the kitten drowned. Not typical dog behavior at all. Around 10:30 one night, I was there alone, getting everything put up and getting ready to leave, when I heard what sounded like palms and bare feet slapping concrete at a very brisk pace coming into my direction. Very different from the sound of animals and non-retractable claws make on concrete. So I turned to face the noise, and out of nowhere, I see what most easily can be described as a creature that looked like Golem from Lord of the Rings, but more backbone and ribs showing, running on all fours. His ribs could be counted, and the abdomen was so sunken and malnourished that it's basically just rib cage. Stomach cavities slightly wider than the spine, and hip bones. As I turned the rest of the way to face it, it became that dog. At this point, I'm like, what the hell? So I look at him, and I don't know what you are, but you better stay looking like a dog or we're going to have a problem. Like I could do shit. After I said that, I kid you not, this dog cocked his head to the side and smiled at me. I noped the fuck out of there as fast as I could. I never ended up seeing that dog again, since 3 days after the incident, he apparently ran away, and no one knew where he went. I lived in a townhouse that sat in front of a good bit of forested area where my 2 cats liked to go do cat stuff. We somehow developed a system where I could whistle for them, and wherever they were, they'd come running. This went on nearly every evening around sunset for 2 years. 3 months ago, however, I went out behind the house later than normal, 10ish to the tree line, whistled, and turned around to walk back to the door, and I hear my whistle back. The same tune in the same weird way I whistle. Think one of those water whistles. At this point, the feeling of dread just settles in my stomach and I hurry inside. Cats turned up about 5 minutes later. I brushed it off as maybe someone in the woods fucking with me and continued with life. Then about a month later, I go out and call for them, and my whistle once again meets me from the trees. I think I said something like, "Stop that," out loud and hustled back inside, and until we moved out a month later that occurrence, I had this feeling, an image in my head of some dark figure trying to rush the front door every time I would close it, so I would lock the deadbolt super fast and check the peephole. It got to where the feeling was intense enough that I salted the threshold and drew a new sigil on the door. Since moving, everything has been chill, until I discovered the subreddit and found out that what these things were.